The sky was still dark when the alarm went off in the royal apartment. Prince William reached over and turned it off quickly. Today was not a day to sleep in. It was May 6, 2023, the day his father, King Charles II, would be crowned. William sat up in bed and looked over at Kate, who was already awake. "Big day," she said softly. William nodded. The biggest for the family in many years. Outside their windows, London was waking up. People had been camping on the streets all night to get good spots to watch the royal family pass by. Some had traveled from far away just to be there on this special day. The royal couple got out of bed and began their morning routine. Unlike most days, today every minute was planned. A team of helpers was already in the apartment, ready to assist with clothes, hair, and makeup. William and Kate wanted to look perfect, but their biggest worry was getting their 3 children ready. "I'll check on Louis," William said, walking down the hall to his youngest son's room. Prince Louis was only 5 years old and known for his funny faces and lively behavior at royal events. William opened the door to find Louis already jumping on his bed, full of energy. "Today is Grandpa's big party," Louis shouted when he saw his father. William smiled and caught his son mid-jump. "Yes, but it's not just a party. It's a very important ceremony, and you need to be on your best behavior." Louis nodded seriously, but William could see the mischief in his eyes. Getting Louis to sit still for the hours-long ceremony would be a challenge. In another room, Kate was helping Princess Charlotte get dressed. At 8 years old, Charlotte was becoming more aware of her royal duties. "Will there be many people watching us?" Charlotte asked as Kate brushed her long hair. "Yes, darling. Millions of people from all around the world," Kate explained in simple terms. "They want to see Grandpa become king officially." Charlotte thought about this. "That's a lot of people. I'll make sure Louis behaves." Kate smiled at her daughter's serious tone. Charlotte had always been protective of her younger brother. In the largest bedroom, Prince George was already dressed in his special outfit. At 9 years old, he had an important role in the ceremony as one of the pages of honor. He would help carry the heavy robe behind King Charles. George stood in front of a mirror, practicing his formal walk. A royal assistant was showing him exactly how to move. "Remember, Your Royal Highness, small steps. Keep your back straight." George nodded, his young face serious. He understood that this was not just any day. Someday, after his father, he too would be crowned king. Even at his young age, he felt the weight of this future. William came in and put a hand on his son's shoulder. "You look very smart, George." "Thanks, Dad. I'm a bit nervous," George admitted. "That's perfectly normal." "I'm nervous too," William said, fixing his son's collar. "Just remember what we practiced." The smell of breakfast filled the apartment as the family gathered around the table. It was a special meal prepared by the royal chefs. They needed good food to keep their energy up for the long day ahead. Kate made sure the children ate well. "It will be many hours before we get lunch," she reminded them. As they ate, William's phone buzzed with messages. Royal aides were checking if everything was on schedule. Outside, they could hear the growing noise of crowds. After breakfast, it was time for final preparations. William put on his military uniform with all his medals and special badges. Kate wore a beautiful dress with a special headpiece called a tiara. The children lined up for a final check. George in his page uniform, Charlotte in her pretty dress, and Louis trying not to fidget in his formal clothes. William looked at his family with pride. "Today is a day we'll all remember forever," he said. "Let's make Grandpa proud." A royal assistant appeared at the door. "Your Royal Highnesses, the cars are ready." The family took deep breaths. It was time to step out into history. The royal family stepped outside into the cool morning air. 3 shiny black cars waited for them. People with earpieces and serious faces stood nearby, keeping everyone safe. These were the royal security team. "Wow, look at all the flags," shouted Louis, pointing at the decorations that lined the driveway. The streets of London had been transformed overnight. Red, white, and blue flags hung from buildings. Pictures of King Charles were everywhere. Shop windows showed special coronation displays. Kate held Louis's hand tightly. She knew how easily excited he could get. "Remember what we talked about," she said quietly. "This is a very special day for Grandpa." The family split into two cars. William, George, and Charlotte got into the first car. George needed to arrive early for his special role. Kate and Louis would follow in the second car. "See you there," William said, giving Kate a quick kiss. He looked a bit worried about being separated, even for a short time. Inside the first car, William sat between his two oldest children. The seats were soft leather, and the windows were dark so people couldn't see in easily, but the royal family could see out. "Dad, there are so many people," Charlotte said as the car moved slowly down the street. Crowds lined both sides, waving flags and taking pictures. William nodded. "They'd been waiting all night to see us and Grandpa." George was quiet, watching the crowds. "Will this happen for you one day, Dad?" he asked suddenly. William looked at his son. It was a big question. "Yes," he said simply. "And one day, many years from now, for you too." George nodded seriously. Even at 9 years old, he understood something about his future. In the second car, Louis was bouncing on the seat. "Money, can I wave to the people?" he asked. Kate smiled. "Yes, but remember to sit nicely. The whole world is watching today." Louis pressed his face against the window. "They're all so happy," he said. "Yes," Kate agreed. "It's a happy day for our country." As the cars moved through London, the crowds grew bigger. People cheered and called out the royal family's names. Some held up signs saying, "God save the King," or "We love you, William and Kate." Inside the first car, Charlotte asked, "Dad, why are some people crying?" William looked out at the emotional faces in the crowd. "Sometimes people cry when they're happy," he explained. "They feel connected to our family. Days like today remind them of other big royal days, like when Granny Elizabeth became queen." The cars turned onto a main road. Police officers on motorcycles drove in front of them, clearing the way. The road to Westminster Abbey was completely blocked off for the royal cars. "Look, you can see the Abbey now," William pointed out to his children. The huge church with its tall towers came into view. It was over 1,000 years old. Kings and queens have been crowned there for centuries. "It looks even bigger today," Charlotte said quietly. Around the Abbey, the crowds were biggest of all. People stood 10 deep behind barriers. They had been waiting since dawn or earlier. Many wore paper crowns or face paint with the British flag. In the second car, Louis bounced higher to see better. "Mummy, look at all the soldiers," he said. Soldiers in bright red uniforms and tall black hats stood in perfect lines. Their buttons shined in the morning light. "Those are the Royal Guards," Kate explained. "They're here to honor Grandpa." The first car stopped at a special entrance. William took a deep breath and turned to George. "Ready for your big moment?" George nodded, looking nervous but brave. "You'll do wonderfully," William assured him, "just like we practiced." Royal helpers opened the car door. The cheers from the crowd grew louder when they saw William, George, and Charlotte step out. William stood tall and waved to the people. George and Charlotte copied their father, waving politely. The second car pulled up. Kate stepped out first, then helped Louis. She wore a beautiful white dress with special decorations. Even Louis looked smart in his little suit. The family came together at the entrance of Westminster Abbey. William took Kate's hand. Together, they led their children toward the huge wooden doors. Inside waited centuries of history and tradition. Inside waited King Charles, ready to be crowned. And the whole world was watching. The heavy wooden doors of Westminster Abbey opened wide. William, Kate, and their children stepped inside. The noise from outside suddenly became quiet. The air felt cool and smelled of old stone and fresh flowers. "It's so big," whispered Louis, looking up at the high ceiling. His voice echoed a little. Kate put her finger to her lips. "We need to be very quiet now," she said softly. Inside the abbey, everything looked different from normal days. Thousands of flowers in white, blue, and red colors filled the space. Long red carpets covered the stone floor. Golden chairs lined both sides of the main path. A helper in a fancy uniform came to meet them. "Your Royal Highnesses," he said with a small bow. "Please follow me." George had to go a different way. His job as page of honor meant he needed to join the other boys who would help carry the king's robe. "You'll be wonderful," William told him, straightening George's collar one last time. George nodded bravely, though his face looked a bit pale. A helper led him away to a side room where the other pages waited. William, Kate, Charlotte, and Louis continued walking through the abbey. Many important people were already seated. When the royal family passed by, everyone stood up to show respect. Louis waved at some people he recognized. Kate gently took his hand to remind him to walk properly. Charlotte walked perfectly, just as she had been taught, with her back straight and small steps. They reached their special seats in the front row. From here, they could see the golden throne where King Charles would sit to be crowned. Beautiful stained glass windows let colored light into the huge space. "Look up there," William whispered to his children, pointing to the ceiling. "Kings and queens have been crowned in this same place for almost 1,000 years." Louis looked around with wide eyes. Charlotte studied the throne with interest. Both children seemed to feel the importance of where they were. More and more people filled the abbey. Famous actors, singers, world leaders, and royals from other countries took their seats. Everyone wore their best clothes. The women had beautiful hats and dresses. The men wore smart suits or military uniforms. A group of men in red and gold uniforms came to check that everything was perfect. They carried long staffs topped with gold symbols. These were the royal officials who had planned every minute of the day. "It's almost time," William said quietly to Kate. Kate nodded. She gently fixed Charlotte's hair and made sure Louis was sitting properly. "Remember," she told Louis, "you need to sit still for a long time." Louis nodded seriously, though his legs already wanted to swing under his chair. Suddenly, music started. A large group of singers in white robes walked in slowly. These were the choir boys who would sing during the ceremony. Their clear voices filled the huge space with beautiful sounds that seemed to float up to the high ceiling. More officials entered, carrying shiny objects on cushions. These were the crown jewels, the special treasures that would be used in the ceremony. There was a golden ball called the orb, a staff called the scepter, and most important of all, the heavy golden crown covered with jewels. Louis's eyes grew wide at the sight of the crown. "Is that what Grandpa will wear?" he whispered a bit too loudly. "Yes," Charlotte whispered back. "But you need to be quiet now." The music changed. Everyone in the abbey stood up. This meant the most important moment was coming. King Charles was about to enter. William took a deep breath. This was his father's big moment, but it also meant something important for him. One day, it would be William sitting on that throne, wearing that crown. Kate noticed William's serious face. She gently touched his hand. Their eyes met in a look that said more than words. They both understood the weight of this moment and what it meant for their family's future. The huge doors at the back of the abbey opened again. A new piece of music started, louder and more grand than before. Everyone turned to look. King Charles had arrived. King Charles walked slowly down the long aisle of Westminster Abbey. He wore a long red robe with white fur trim. His face looked serious but calm. Behind him walked Queen Camilla in her own special clothes. William felt his heart beat faster as he watched his father. This was the man who had taught him about being royal, who had helped him through the hard years after his mother died, and who would now be crowned king. Louis could not stay still. "There's Grandpa," he whispered loudly, pointing. Kate gently lowered his hand. "Yes, but remember, no pointing," she said quietly. The music grew louder as King Charles reached the middle of the abbey. That's when William spotted George walking with 3 other boys. They followed behind Charles, helping to carry his heavy robe so it wouldn't drag on the floor. George's face was serious. He took small, careful steps, just as he had practiced. "Look at George," Charlotte whispered to her mother. "He's doing it right." Kate nodded with pride. Her oldest son, only 9 years old, was handling his important job perfectly. King Charles reached the special area at the front of the abbey. This was called the Coronation Theater. Here, all the important parts of the ceremony would happen. Charles stood tall as the Archbishop of Canterbury, the most important church leader in England, greeted him. The ceremony began with prayers and songs. William noticed Louis starting to fidget in his seat. The little boy clearly found it hard to sit still for so long. Kate reached into her small bag and pulled out a tiny toy car. She slipped it into Louis's hand. This kept him busy for a while. When it was time for the most important part, everyone became very quiet. King Charles sat on a special wooden chair called the Coronation chair. This chair was over 700 years old. Kings and queens had sat in this same chair for hundreds of years. The Archbishop lifted the heavy golden crown. Sunlight from the windows made the jewels sparkle with all colors of the rainbow. He held it high for everyone to see, then slowly lowered it onto King Charles's head. At that exact moment, George, who was standing near his grandfather, looked over at his father. Their eyes met. William gave a small nod, as if to say, "One day, this will be us." A loud shout filled the abbey. "God save the King." Everyone repeated the words 3 times. The choir began to sing. Bells rang out from the abbey's towers. The sound was so loud that Louis covered his ears. Charlotte watched everything with wide eyes. She leaned close to Kate and asked, "Is Grandpa different now?" Kate thought for a moment. "He's the same person," she whispered, "but now he has officially taken on a very big job." After the crown was placed on Charles's head, other important objects were given to him. He held a golden ball called the orb, which stood for the world. He held a stick called the scepter, which stood for his power. All these things had special meanings from long ago. William watched his father sitting on the throne, now officially King Charles II. He felt many emotions at once: pride, love, and a sense of his own future. Someday, he would sit in that same chair. The crown would be placed on his head, and George would be watching him, just as he now watched his father. The ceremony continued with more prayers and songs. Louis began to yawn. The excitement and the long sitting were making him tired. Kate put her arm around him, letting him lean against her. Charlotte sat up straight the whole time, taking in every detail. She seemed to understand, even at her young age, that she was watching history happen. George finished his duties as page of honor and joined his family. William put his hand on his son's shoulder, giving it a gentle squeeze. No words were needed. The look of pride on William's face said everything. As the main part of the ceremony ended, trumpets played a loud, happy song. The sound seemed to make the whole abbey shake. Louis perked up at this, his tiredness forgotten. King Charles stood and began to walk through the abbey again, now fully crowned as king. As he passed the front row, he gave a special smile to his grandchildren. After the main part of the ceremony, there was still more to do. King Charles, now officially crowned, had to meet many important people. The royal family waited as he spoke with church leaders and government officials. William checked his watch. The ceremony had already lasted 2 hours. He looked at his children, wondering how they were holding up. George sat tall, proud of his role in the ceremony. Charlotte watched everything with interest. But Louis was getting restless again. "How much longer?" Louis whispered to Kate. "Not too much longer," she said, though she knew there was still at least another hour to go. Louis sighed dramatically. Then he made a funny face at a small boy in the row behind them. The boy tried not to laugh, but couldn't help it. Kate gave Louis a gentle but firm look. Louis stopped, but his eyes still showed his mischief. The next part of the ceremony involved special prayers. Everyone had to stand up again. As they stood, Charlotte noticed something important. "Daddy," she whispered to William, "look at Grandpa's ring." William nodded. King Charles was wearing a special golden ring called the Coronation ring. It was sometimes called the wedding ring of England. It showed that the king was married to his country and promised to take care of it. "One day, you'll wear that ring," Charlotte said quietly to her father. William looked surprised at his daughter's understanding. Even at 8 years old, she grasped the meaning of these old traditions. After the prayers, the royal family sat down again. Kate noticed Louis looking very tired. She took a small candy from her purse and gave it to him. This brightened him up right away. A choir of children began to sing a beautiful song. The sweet voices filled the huge space of the abbey. Even Louis stopped fidgeting to listen. George leaned toward his father. "Dad," he whispered, "when I'm king, will I have the same ceremony?" William was surprised by the question. "Yes," he said softly. "This ceremony has happened almost the same way for hundreds of years." George nodded, thinking about this. William wondered what was going through his son's mind. Did George understand how far in the future his own coronation would be? Did he feel the weight of his future role? The ceremony continued with more traditions. King Charles sat on different thrones. He made promises to the people. Leaders from different religions gave him their blessing. Through it all, William watched his father with new eyes. This was no longer just his father. This was his king, his boss, his example to follow. The change was strange to feel. Kate noticed William's serious face. She reached over Louis and Charlotte to touch his hand. Their eyes met in understanding. Kate had always been good at reading William's thoughts. Louis, meanwhile, had found a new way to keep busy. He was counting all the jewels he could see on the crown. He was up to 24 when he lost track and had to start again. Charlotte was watching the queen with interest. Camilla wore her own smaller crown and special robes. Charlotte noticed how the queen sometimes checked on King Charles, making sure he was comfortable. It reminded her of how her mother looked after her father. As the ceremony neared its end, the abbey filled with music again. This time, it was a happy, powerful song with trumpets and drums. The sound was so big that Louis could feel it in his chest. His eyes widened with excitement. "This is the best part," he said, a bit too loudly. Several people turned to look at him, some smiling at his enthusiasm. Kate tried to quiet him, but William just smiled. He was proud of how well his children had behaved during such a long ceremony. King Charles stood up from his throne. Now it was time for the royal family to leave the abbey and show themselves to the waiting crowds outside. This would be the moment when the world would see the newly crowned king. William took a deep breath. The day was only half over. Next would come the carriage ride through London, then the appearance on the palace balcony. It would be a test of everyone's energy, especially the children's. But as he looked at George, Charlotte, and Louis, he felt confident. They were doing wonderfully. They were showing themselves to be true members of the royal family, even at their young ages. The ceremony was finally ending. The choir sang one last song as King Charles and Queen Camilla prepared to leave Westminster Abbey. The royal family would follow them. "Stand up nicely now," Kate whispered to her children. Louis, who had been sitting for so long, was happy to stand. He bounced a little on his toes. The abbey doors opened. Bright light streamed in from outside. The crowd's cheers could be heard even inside the huge stone building. The sound grew louder as King Charles walked toward the doors. William turned to his family. "Ready?" he asked with a smile. The children nodded. George looked serious, understanding the importance of the day. Charlotte stood straight and proper, just like her mother. Louis was excited, ready to see the crowds again. As they walked down the long aisle behind the king and queen, many eyes watched them. The world was seeing not just the current king, but also the future kings, William and George. When they reached the doors, The sound of cheering hit them like a wave. Thousands of people filled the streets, waving flags and taking pictures. The sky was clear blue now, perfect for the occasion. "Wow," Lewis said, his eyes wide at the sight. He started to wave immediately. Outside, royal helpers guided them to where they would stand. King Charles and Queen Camilla went to a special gold carriage. This coach was very old and had been used by kings and queens for over 200 years. "Look at the horses," Charlotte said, pointing to the 8 white horses that would pull the carriage. The horses wore red and gold decorations and had feathers on their heads. William, Kate, and their children would ride in a different carriage. But first, they had to stand and watch as King Charles and Queen Camilla got into the golden coach. The crowds cheered wildly as the king and queen waved from the carriage windows. Bells rang from churches all over London. Military bands played music. Soldiers on horses rode alongside the carriage to protect it. As the golden carriage moved away, it was time for the rest of the royal family to get into their carriages. William and Kate's carriage was also very grand, though not as fancy as the king's. "Can I sit by the window?" Louis asked excitedly. "Yes, but remember to wave nicely," Kate replied, helping him step up into the carriage. The inside of the carriage was lined with red velvet. The seats were soft but not very big. The family had to sit close together. William and Kate sat on one side, with George and Charlotte across from them. Louis moved from side to side, wanting to see everything. As their carriage joined the procession, the crowd's cheers grew even louder. People called out their names. "They're so happy to see us," Charlotte said, waving carefully like she had been taught. William nodded. "Days like today bring people together. They're celebrating our whole country, not just Grandpa." The carriage moved slowly through the streets of London. The route was over 2 miles long and would take about 30 minutes. Every inch of the way was lined with people. Louis waved enthusiastically, sometimes with both hands. "My arm is getting tired," he complained after a while, but he kept waving anyway. George waved more seriously, trying to copy his father's style. Charlotte waved gracefully like her mother, turning from side to side so everyone could see her. Kate noticed how different each child's personality showed in the way they handled this big public moment. George was thoughtful and proper. Charlotte was graceful and aware. Louis was full of energy and charm. William caught Kate's eye and smiled. They didn't need words to share their pride in their children. The carriage passed famous London landmarks. Trafalgar Square with its big fountains, the tall column with Admiral Nelson on top, and government buildings with their important history. At one point, Louis spotted something that excited him. "Look, people on a roof," he called out, pointing to a building where people had climbed up to get a better view. Some people in the crowd heard him and laughed. They loved seeing this normal child excitement from a royal prince. As they got closer to Buckingham Palace, the crowds grew even bigger. Some people had been waiting all day to see the royal family. They threw flowers in the road. They took thousands of pictures. Charlotte noticed something touching. "Daddy, that lady is crying," she said, pointing to a woman with tears running down her face as she waved a flag. "Some people feel very emotional today," William explained. "They remember other coronations, or they're thinking about how special this day is in history." The huge gates of Buckingham Palace came into view. They were almost at the end of the carriage ride. But the day was not over yet. The biggest moment was still to come, when the whole royal family would stand on the famous balcony for all the world to see. The carriage passed through the tall gates of Buckingham Palace. The noise of the crowds became quieter as they entered the private grounds. In front of them stood the huge palace with its many windows and grand entrance. Helpers in red uniforms opened the carriage door. William stepped out first, then turned to help Kate and the children. Louis jumped down eagerly, happy to be able to move around after sitting for so long. "Can we go to the balcony now?" Louis asked, bouncing on his toes. Kate smiled. "Not yet. First, we need to wait for Grandpa to arrive, and then we have to get ready. The family walked into the palace through a special door. Inside, it was cool and quiet after the noise and sunshine outside. The halls of the palace were filled with people working quickly. Some carried food and drinks. Others prepared cameras and microphones for the balcony appearance. George looked up at the high ceilings and paintings of kings and queens from long ago. Some of these people were his relatives from hundreds of years in the past. One day, his own picture would hang on these walls. "I'm hungry," Charlotte said suddenly. The ceremony and procession had taken many hours, and none of them had eaten since breakfast. "Me too," Louis agreed loudly. William checked his watch. "We have some time before the balcony appearance. Let's get something to eat." A palace helper led them to a room where food had been prepared. There were small sandwiches, fruit, and cakes laid out on silver trays. The children sat at a table while Kate poured them water from a crystal pitcher. "Remember to eat neatly," she reminded them. "We'll be on camera soon." Louis took a big bite of the sandwich. "These are better than the ones at home," he said with his mouth full. Kate gave him a look, and he quickly closed his mouth to chew properly. William's phone buzzed. He looked at the message and turned to his family. "Grandpa's carriage has arrived. We need to start getting ready." Helpers came to fix everyone's appearance. They'd brushed the children's hair and made sure their clothes weren't wrinkled. Kate's tiara was adjusted to sit perfectly on her head. William's medals were straightened on his chest. A palace official with a clipboard appeared at the door. "Your Royal Highnesses, we need you in position in 10 minutes." The family left the room and walked through the grand halls of the palace. They passed rooms with golden furniture and huge paintings. Guards stood straight and still as they walked by. They reached a large room with tall windows that led to the famous balcony. King Charles and Queen Camilla were already there, talking with other members of the royal family who would join them outside. When the king saw his grandchildren, his serious face broke into a warm smile. "There you are," he said. "How did you enjoy the ceremony?" "It was very long, Grandpa," Louis said honestly. Everyone laughed. Even on this most formal day, Louis spoke exactly what he thought. "Yes, it was rather long," King Charles agreed, patting Louis's head. "You all did wonderfully." William moved closer to his father. "Congratulations, Your Majesty," he said formally, then added more softly, "And congratulations, Dad." For a moment, the two men looked at each other with deep understanding. This day had changed their relationship forever. Charles was now not just William's father but his king. And William was one step closer to the day when he would wear the crown. The palace official returned. 2 minutes, Your Majesty," he said to the king. The family lined up in the correct order. King Charles and Queen Camilla would go first. Then William and Kate with their children. Then other members of the royal family. "Remember to stand tall and wave nicely," Kate told her children one last time. "The whole world is watching." George and Charlotte nodded seriously. Louis practiced his wave, moving his hand back and forth. William looked at his family with pride. They had done so well all day. Just one more important moment to go. The tall windows opened. Bright sunlight streamed in. The sound of the waiting crowd was like thunder. "Ready?" King Charles asked, looking back at them all. The royal family stepped forward together toward the light and the noise. It was time for the most famous balcony appearance in years, the first of a new king. The royal family stepped onto the famous balcony of Buckingham Palace. The noise from the crowd was so loud that Louis covered his ears for a moment. Thousands of people filled the area in front of the palace as far as the eye could see. Many waved British flags. Some held up signs saying, "God save the King." King Charles and Queen Camilla stood in the middle of the balcony. William, Kate, and their children stood to their right. Other royal family members stood to their left. The whole family formed a line across the balcony. The crowd cheered even louder when they saw the children. Louis, now over his shock at the noise, began to wave with both hands. His excited face made many people in the crowd laugh, and take pictures. Look how many people there are, Charlotte said, her eyes wide as she took in the sea of faces. George stood tall next to his father. He waved properly, turning his hand from side to side the way he had been taught. William noticed how much his son looked like a future king already. Suddenly, Louis pointed to the sky. "Planes, planes," he shouted. Everyone looked up. Coming toward them were airplanes from the Royal Air Force. This was the famous flypast that happened at big royal events. First came helicopters flying in perfect lines. Then came larger planes in different groups. The crowd cheered as red, white, and blue smoke filled the sky behind the planes. These colors matched the British flag. The smoke made long streaks across the blue sky. "This is my favorite part," William told his children. He had loved planes since he was a boy. He had even worked as a helicopter pilot for some years. Kate put her arm around Louis, who was now jumping up and down with excitement. She whispered something in his ear, and he tried to stand still, but his eyes stayed fixed on the planes. The noise grew louder as the fastest jets approached. These planes flew so close together that they looked like they might touch. The pilots had practiced for months to get this exactly right. When the famous Red Arrows team flew over, leaving streams of red, white, and blue smoke behind them, Louis could not contain himself. "Wow!" he shouted so loudly that many people on the balcony turned to look at him. King Charles glanced at his youngest grandson with a smile. Charlotte tugged on Kate's sleeve. "Mummy, are those the same planes we saw at Great-Granny's birthday?" she asked, remembering Queen Elizabeth's celebrations. Kate nodded. "Yes, but today they're flying for Grandpa." The flypast lasted about 6 minutes. When the last planes disappeared, the royal family remained on the balcony, waving to the crowd. This was an important moment. The first time the new king and his family showed themselves to the people after the coronation. Photographers below took thousands of pictures. These photos would be in newspapers and on websites around the world. They would become the official images people remembered from this historic day. William thought about how quickly time had passed. It seemed like just yesterday when he had stood on this same balcony as a small boy, waving next to his mother, Princess Diana. Now he was here with his own children, next to his father the king. After about 10 minutes on the balcony, King Charles gave a signal. It was time to go back inside. The family waved one last time to the cheering crowd. As they turned to walk back through the tall windows, Louis gave an extra big wave and blew a kiss to the people. This made the crowd cheer even louder. Kate smiled at her youngest son. Even on this most formal day, Louis brought natural joy to the occasion. Back inside the palace, everyone relaxed a little. The public part of the day was mostly over. King Charles patted William on the shoulder. "Well done, all of you," he said to the family, especially the children. George, Charlotte, and Louis beamed with pride at their grandfather's praise. They had been part of history today. Years from now, people would still talk about this coronation and how the young princes and princess had been there. William checked his watch. There was still one more event to come, a special family dinner to celebrate the coronation. But first, the children would have a chance to rest and change out of their formal clothes. Evening came to London. The sun began to set, turning the sky pink and orange. Inside Buckingham Palace, the royal family prepared for their private celebration dinner. The children had rested and changed into more comfortable clothes. Louis, who had been so full of energy all day, was finally showing signs of tiredness. He lay on a couch in one of the palace's many rooms, his head on Kate's lap. "Was I good today, Mummy?" he asked, looking up at her. Kate stroked his hair. "You were wonderful," she said. "Everyone loved seeing you wave and smile." George and Charlotte sat nearby, looking through some of the photos that had already appeared on palace staff phones. They giggled at one picture of Louis making a funny face during the ceremony. "Look at this one of us on the balcony," Charlotte said, showing George a photo where all 3 children stood with their parents and grandfather. George studied the picture. "That's going to be in the history books," he said seriously. William entered the room, now dressed in a simple dark suit instead of his military uniform. "Dinner is almost ready," he told his family. "Grandpa wants us all there in 15 minutes. Kate nodded and gently woke Louis, who had dozed off. The little boy rubbed his eyes but got up without complaining. Even he understood that this was a special family dinner they couldn't miss. The family walked together through the palace to a beautiful dining room. Unlike the state dining room used for official events, this was a smaller, more private space. The table was set with fine china and crystal, but the feeling was less formal than earlier in the day. King Charles and Queen Camilla were already there, along with other close family members. Charles had changed out of his heavy ceremonial robes into a simple suit. He looked more relaxed now that the public ceremonies were over. Everyone took their places at the table. Staff served a special meal prepared by the palace chefs. There were favorite foods of the king, and also some child-friendly options for the younger family members. As they ate, they talked about moments from the day. Everyone had a different memory to share. "I like the planes the best," Louis said, suddenly perking up at the chance to talk about his favorite part. "I thought George was so grown-up carrying Grandpa's robe," Charlotte added, smiling at her older brother. George looked pleased but embarrassed by the praise. "I was just worried about tripping," he admitted. The adults laughed. King Charles raised his glass in a toast. "To family," he said simply. Everyone, even the children with their water glasses, joined in. As the meal continued, William noticed how his father kept looking around the table at all of them. There was a new depth in Charles's eyes. The weight of the crown now truly his. "What are you thinking, Dad?" William asked quietly when they had a moment alone. Charles smiled slightly. "About how quickly it all passes," he said. "It seems like yesterday that you were Louis's age, and now look at you, a father of 3, next in line to the throne." William nodded, understanding. The crown would pass from father to son, as it had for hundreds of years. After dinner, the family moved to a sitting room. A photographer was waiting there, not for public photos, but for private family pictures to remember the day. These would be just for them, not for the world to see. They arranged themselves on and around a sofa. Louis, despite his earlier tiredness, insisted on sitting right next to his grandfather, the king. Charles put his arm around his youngest grandson, his formal manner completely gone now. The photographer took several pictures, then showed them on his camera screen. In the best one, everyone was smiling naturally. Even George, who often looked serious in public, had a big smile. It captured not the royal family, but simply a family, 3 generations together on an important day. Later, as the evening ended and they prepared to leave the palace for their own home, Kate found William looking out a window at the London lights. "What a day," she said, standing beside him. William put his arm around her. "Our children were amazing," he said proudly. "They're growing up so fast." Kate leaned her head on his shoulder. "Days like today help them understand who they are," she said. "Not just the royal parts, but the family parts too." William nodded. Tomorrow they would return to school runs and normal life. But today would stay with all of them forever. The day when George, Charlotte, and Louis witnessed history, played their part in it, and made their parents prouder than they could say.